Hello, everyone. My name is Priscilla Gray, and I'm here to talk about Jewish resistance in the Warsaw Ghetto. First off, there were over 1,000 ghettos set up throughout Nazi-controlled territories. The Nazis used these ghettos to isolate the Jewish population. The largest ghetto was in Warsaw, where almost 500,000 Jews were confined. These men, women, and children were ripped apart from their families, only to watch their loved ones be murdered, starved, and die from the sickness of the unsanitary conditions inside. Why were Jews targeted by Adolf Hitler and his regime of Nazis? Hitler had strong beliefs about pure-blooded Germans being the dominant race, and considered Jews as the lowest form of humans as they were classified as non-Germans. This was taught in many German schools, and as many blamed Jews for the loss of World War I. There are many reasons as to why Jews were targeted, as many believe Hitler was a master manipulator, and though the reasons are out there, no one can ever excuse the actions that were taken and the lives that suffered. However, Jews found a way to resist Nazi persecution. This is displayed in the Warsaw Ghetto and its uprising. Before the Second World War, Warsaw was the capital of Poland and held the largest Jewish community in Europe. German troops seized Warsaw on September 27th of 1939, the ghetto being created a year later, on October 12th of 1940. The ghetto was segregated from the rest of the population and guarded inside and out. It condemned almost 500,000 Jews, and only those allowed to leave required special permits. From the beginning, conditions inside the ghetto were poor. Food was scarce, and starvation was common. Smuggling food into the ghetto was not only a way of passive resistance, but also how the people inside survived. They used the sewers to smuggle food in from outside of the ghetto. Some paid the guards at the gate, and others even climbed the wall. With almost 500,000 inside the ghetto, that was 1.3 square miles, the conditions were more than just unsanitary, and many did not have access to running water. Nearly 20% of the entire population inside the ghetto died of starvation, the cold, and disease. As conditions in the ghetto only continued to worsen, and the fear of being deported to a death camp set in, resistance in the Warsaw Ghetto grew. And so the uprising began on April 19th of 1943. German forces entered the ghetto in order to arrest Jews and deport them, and to their surprise, Jews resisted the German efforts. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising is known as one of the largest during World War II, and the first revolt against German occupation in Europe. But for the resistance to take place required a lot of time and planning. Inside the ghetto, they had the time. From July to September of 1942, German police units assisted by auxiliaries carried out deportations from the ghetto to Treblinka, the killing center. This was during what was described as the Great Action, and only about 80,000 Jews remained out of 500,000 in the ghetto after this. By the late summer, it was clear to most who still inhabited the ghetto that deportations meant certain death. As a result of these deportations, several Jewish underground organizations joined each other. They formed the Jewish Combat Organization, and there was a second force organized as well, which was called the Jewish Military Union. Both groups worked together to fight the German attempts to destroy the ghetto and the inhabitants inside with it. In October, the ZOB, Jewish Combat Organization, established contact with a Polish military underground movement known as the Home Army, or AK. They then gathered weapons, a small number of mainly pistols and explosives, from the AK. In January of 1943, the German SS and police units returned to the Warsaw Ghetto to resume deportations, where they were met. A small group of Jewish fighter armed infiltrated a column of the Jews being forced to the transfer point. When the signal was given, this group broke off and fought the German escorts. Most of the Jewish fighters died in the battle, but the attack shook the Germans. As a result, the Jews who were at the transfer point had a chance to run away. Jewish resistance leaders also encouraged the ghetto inhabitants to not follow the deportation orders and hide from the German authorities inside the ghetto. This was another form of passive resistance. Because of this, Germans suspended any further deportations. This brought light to the Jewish inhabitants inside the Warsaw Ghetto. As they began to construct subterranean bunkers and shelters, they were preparing for the uprisings should the Germans try to proceed with a final deportation of the remaining Jews from the ghetto. On April 19th of 1943, the Jews began their final act of armed resistance against the Germans. This act of resistance known as the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which lasted 27 days. The Jewish Combat Organization, or ZOB, had gained knowledge of the final deportation that was planned out by the Germans. The ZOB then warned inhabitants of the ghetto to retreat to their bunkers. The ZOB fighters were armed with only pistols, some homemade grenades, and a few automatic weapons and rifles. The Germans were stunned of their auxiliaries on the first day and were forced to retreat outside of the ghetto wall. Most Jewish fighters were poorly equipped and lacked military training and experience the German regime had. The ZOB, or Jewish Combat Organization, used guerrilla warfare to their advantage. They would strike and then retreat to the safe ghetto building, bunkers, and underground tunnels. The general population of the ghetto ignored the Germans' deportation efforts, refusing to assemble and instead hid away in the bunkers. However, German forces came up with a different plan. Fighting was met with such resistance, and so they decided to burn the ghetto, block by block. The inhabitants running out of their hiding places, getting caught by German forces, others fleeing. For months after the Germans liquidated the Warsaw Ghetto, Jews continued to hide in the ruins, and some on occasion would attack German police officials while they were patrolling. It is believed that as many as 20,000 Jews continued to live in hiding on what was called the Aryan side of Warsaw. The Warsaw Ghetto and its uprisings was one of the largest and known as the most important Jewish uprising during World War II. It teaches us many forms of passive and typical violent resistance, but as we see the resistance that has happened, it is because of the desperation. Smuggling food in the ghetto to not starve to death while fighting sickness and disease. Constructing bunkers and shelter to hide for the fear of being deported to a death camp. Even creating homemade grenades and fighting with little weapons they could find. However, the resistance in Warsaw inspired uprisings in many other ghettos.